At 5:47 in the morning, I woke up to what sounded like thunder rolling across the valley, except the sky outside my window was perfectly clear. Then I realized it wasn't thunder. It was hooves. Heavy, pounding hooves shaking the ground like war drums, mixed with the sharp crack of branches snapping somewhere in the dark. And before I even reached the window, another thing hit me. The smell. Manure. Wet, thick, overwhelming, flooding through the screen door and filling the house before the sun even came up. I stumbled across the floor barefoot, heart racing, still half asleep, and pulled the curtain aside. And that's when my stomach dropped. 100 Holstein cattle were marching straight through my orchard. Not wandering, not grazing, marching. Black and white bodies moving slowly between the rows like a tide rolling across the land my grandfather planted more than 60 years ago. Hooves tearing into the soil. Irrigation lines snapping under their weight. Branches breaking like dry bones. 6 mature Honeycrisp trees were already down, flattened into the mud like they'd never existed. For a few seconds, maybe 4, maybe 5, I couldn't move. Then I saw her. Renata Holloway, president of the Ridgemont Estates HOA. She was parked at the road in a spotless white SUV, arms folded, watching the destruction like someone enjoying a show. When she noticed me standing in the window, she smiled, slow, satisfied, and lifted her hand in a tiny little wave, like she'd already won. That wave told me everything I needed to know about who she was and about the mistake she had just made. My name's Cord Bowman. I inherited 7 acres of apple and pear orchard in the Shenandoah Valley. Most people think orchards are romantic. Sunlight through blossoms, baskets of apples, smiling families taking pictures. The truth is a lot quieter than that. It's frostbitten mornings and sore backs. It's pruning branches before sunrise. It's worrying about storms, pests, droughts, and markets all at once. But to me, that orchard was never just a business. It was family. My grandfather Elmer planted the first trees in 1962 because he believed something simple. Land should be used, not wasted. In the Shenandoah Valley, good soil is a gift, and Elmer believed gifts come with responsibility. I grew up running between those rows, bark scratching my arms, bees buzzing through the blossoms so loud you could hear them from the road. Summer smelled like warm apples and cut grass. Autumn smelled like cider and would smoke. It wasn't glamorous. It was home. When Elmer passed in 2009, the orchard came to me, 7 acres, an old cider barn built in 1971, and more problems than I knew how to solve. I wasn't a farmer. I was an HVAC technician with a bad back and just enough stubbornness to get myself into trouble. Most people told me to sell the place. I didn't, partly because of Elmer, but mostly because of my daughter, Waverly. One winter morning, when she was 9, she stood beside me in the orchard while I struggled to learn pruning from a book. Her boots were too big, and she kept slipping in the mud, but she didn't complain once. She just kept handing me branches. She didn't want to go inside. She wanted to be there. And that was the moment I realized something. The orchard wasn't just my past. It was her future. Over the next decade, we slowly built something out of it. Pick your own weekends. Fresh cider at the farmer's market. Families visiting every fall with their kids, running through the rows. Waverly grew up there the same way I did. By 12 years old, she was running the check-in table on harvest weekends, explaining apple varieties to customers like a tour guide. Every dollar we earned went toward keeping the orchard alive and toward her college fund. Everything was steady, quiet, simple, until Ridgemont Estates elected Renata Holloway as HOA president. The subdivision had been built around the orchard years earlier because my grandfather refused to sell his land to the developers. They built their houses anyway and wrapped the neighborhood around us like water around a rock. For years, the HOA left us alone. Then Renata arrived. She'd spent 20 years in pharmaceutical sales, the kind of job where confidence can slowly turn into entitlement if you're not careful. When she became HOA president, she decided the orchard didn't fit the neighborhood's future vision. She tried to buy the land. I said no. Then she tried again. I said no again. After that, the letters started. According to the HOA, my cider barn, built nearly 30 years before the subdivision even existed, was suddenly a non-conforming commercial structure. $500 a week in fines until I tore it down. At first, I thought it was a mistake. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went to the HOA meeting with documents proving the barn existed decades before their rules. The room was packed. Far more people than usual. And the moment I walked in, I realized something important. Ranetta had already told them a story about me. She'd spent weeks telling neighbors my orchard smelled bad, attracted pests, lowered property values. By the time I stood up to speak, half the room already believed I was the problem. Then her attorney stood up, and suddenly the meeting wasn't a discussion anymore. It was a performance. But that night, something unexpected happened. As I walked out into the cold parking lot, an older man approached me quietly and handed me a business card. He said only one thing. I worked the original survey when this subdivision was built, and your orchard wasn't inside their boundary. Then he drove away. That one sentence changed everything, because when my lawyer pulled the county records, the truth became clear. Someone had quietly altered the property boundary years earlier. My orchard had never legally been part of the HOA. Not once. Not ever. Meanwhile, Ranetta kept escalating, complaints to the county, inspections, legal threats. And then came the cattle. Those 100 Holsteins tearing through my orchard that April morning. But what Ranetta didn't realize was that I'd already installed cameras around the property after the HOA meeting. Every angle, every entrance. And later that morning, one of the ranch hands who had helped drive those cattle showed up at my driveway, looking pale and nervous. He handed me his phone. On the screen was a text message from Ranetta. Make sure they get into the main rows. I want him to see what happens when you fight us. She had put in writing. That message turned the entire case upside down. Suddenly, it wasn't just an HOA dispute. It was criminal trespass and agricultural vandalism. The court case that followed lasted 18 months. Survey experts proved the orchard had never belonged to the HOA. Financial records revealed the HOA had been calculating reserve funds using my property for decades. The judge ruled from the bench that the HOA had no authority over my land, and never had. All fines were void. All claims dismissed. Then came damages. Destroyed trees. Lost harvest revenue. Legal costs. By the time the final ruling came down, the HOA owed me more than $175,000. Paid directly from the same reserve fund Ranetta had relied on. Within weeks, the homeowners voted her out as president. She resigned before the recall even finished. The 6 Honeycrisp trees that were destroyed that morning have already been replaced. Waverly helped me plant new ones last fall. Cold air turned soil, mountains fading blue in the distance. She asked what we should name the new row. Elmer Row, I said. She smiled and nodded. You think Grandpa would have liked how all this ended? I thought about that for a moment. Elmer hated conflict, but he believed something even more strongly. Some lines in life should never be moved. Yeah, I told her. He would have liked the outcome. And that's the lesson this whole thing left me with. People like Ranetta believe power means nobody will fight back. They think pressure makes people fold. But sometimes pressure just reminds you what you're protecting. The orchard is still here. The trees are still growing. And every fall, families still walk those rows, picking apples the same way they did when my grandfather planted the first trees in 1962. Because in the end, land remembers who cared for it. And some boundaries, the important ones, only need to be drawn once. Now I'm curious about something. If someone tried to bully you out of something your family built, would you fight back the way I did? Or would you walk away and choose peace instead? Tell me what you think. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone who believed they had more power than you, share your story too.